to another episode of Conversations with a Therapist. Thank you so much for coming through. I am excited to have you here. It's the first episode of the year where I'm having a guest, and I'm very excited for today's guest. His name is Moses Kuria, and you're going to get to know him. You're going to get to understand the kind of work that he does and all those things. As we wait for him to join, I hope you have had a great day. I hope you are taking you. I hope everything is going well so far as we get started. And you're just waiting for Moses to join. And I hope you have gathered your writing material. You never know what you learn. Hi, Moses. Hello. I don't know if Moses, you can hear me. Can you hear me? You can, but your audio is a bit low, so maybe you want to raise the volume. I cannot hear you at all, but I can tell you're talking.
You can hear me now?
Much better. Much better.
Okay. Nice.
Hi.
It's better.
Hi.
How
are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, so good to have you here. You're just waiting for a few more people to join, but as they join, they find us continuing. I don't think tutawangojea watapata as we go on. And the beauty is that the live is recorded, so they can always catch the parts that they miss.
Yeah.
After we already posted. So karibu sana Moses to this platform. I'm Jennifer.
Hi.
For those who might not know me, and my guest today is Moses Kuria, and this is Conversations with a Therapist podcast. I am the therapist, just in case you were wondering. And yeah, today we'll be talking to Moses to get to know who he is, what he does, why he does what he does, and some of the things that he can teach us about mental health. Moses, karibu sana. Maybe introduce yourself. Tell us how your day has been. How is your new year? It's the second week of the year. How is everything going?
Well, first of all, it's the first, first live that I've been part of this year, which is interesting. I'm looking forward to doing a lot more. So it's really great to do this away from my own thing, just catch up with other people who are doing the same kind of or the same journey with me. So this is interesting. I'm really grateful for the invite. I know we've been planning it for such a long time, so really grateful to be here. My name is Moses, a podcast creator, literally just in, I think I'd say mental health at large, almost fully 100% right now. So it's a pleasure to be here. My day has been pretty interesting. I don't know how to describe it. I think it's been pretty interesting, to say it all. Yeah.
That's awesome. Glad it has been interesting. I hope it's good kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good interesting. Then that's awesome. That's a good thing. So, you've mentioned about mental health, and you are pretty immersed in mental health full time. That's what you said. Could you expand on that? What exactly do you do in the mental health field? How did you stumble upon mental health as a thing? Yeah, walk us through that journey.
Okay, so I work at a mental health organization. I also have a mental health podcast. I write about mental health. I think everything just circulates around mental health, from the podcast, from the work that I do, fully, not just work, but also leisure. Well, I read books about mental health, so I think everything is just surrounding the same thing. So I think that's what I mean when I say I'm fully into mental health. Yeah.
And how did you end up in this space, considering, I don't know what your background is. I know you've mentioned that you have done a bit of psychology. So what is your background, and how did you end up getting immersed in mental health in so many ways? How did that become a thing?
What's funny is that my I don't know, they call majors or whatever in school is communication. I've been in communications for like 4 or 5 years, working on a radio station. That's like what I would say I was first trained to do in school. Then along the way of me practicing that is when through also my mental health struggles and things coming into place because I was pretty young when I started working. I started a different journey of now studying psychology and neuroscience and understanding different aspects of life until when it was right time for me to now make almost like an upgrade from communications to now merging it with mental health. So my background, I could say it's mental health, but it was actually the foundation has been public relations and communication. So psychology became like a merge of it and created what now I do have as a podcast. What I do, as I've told you, almost on a full-time basis now.
Yeah. So what came before what? Did the organization start first or the podcast? Which one came before the other?
Um, the podcast came before everything else. The podcast, it's a lovely story I love telling. I was reading a book by somebody who inspired me to do neuroscience, and when I was reading the book, I got so many inspirations about the world today, and I started a podcast in the middle of me actually reading a book, and I named the podcast after a word I was reading in the book, and I started studying psychology in the middle of me reading a book, and it's like everything just flew from there. I loved the whole experience. So the podcast came before everything else. It's a podcast experience that birthed an organization that does, mental health services. It's out of me feeling like I was giving information, which is pretty cool. Most people needed a lot of like attention from therapists, from counselors. Those who were listening to me needed that. So I said, what's the best way to go? It's expand the podcast and bring in this mental health services to these same people who are actually listening to the podcast. So the podcast came first, everything flew later.
Yeah. Okay. That's really cool. That's really cool. I'm curious about how yeah, I know you mentioned you have your background in communication and everything. So I can understand maybe that contributed to helping you start the podcast. But beyond that, what are other things that helped you start the podcast? Considering it's a very new medium for most people. Most people don't know where to start when they're starting a podcast. Um, so what are some of the things that contributed to you being able to set it up? How did you know some of the topics to talk about beyond the book you were reading? How did you know which direction you were going to take with the podcast? How did you end up with the podcast from the beginning to here? Things along those lines.
Um, it's fun. It's a trial and error thing. Um, I that podcast, the first episode was not meant to be for Unstimulate Your Mind. It was supposed to be a different podcast, which means I did not have the exact direction of the podcast at the beginning, and then I stopped it for like a year. And the next year is when I done things with psychology, and the idea was pretty simple. I was going to merge information from the book that I was reading and do some little research and share the information out. And I knew that I could carry that for a whole season or year, as I could say, because all I needed was to just write like a script based on what I was just learning from the book. But as I was learning, as I was immersing myself in more and more psychology, more content came up. And then along the way, I decided I'm going to merge my personal experiences also. So it was supposed to be very scientific at the beginning. Along the way, I realized, yeah, science makes sense, but some people just need a little encouragement, just little pat in the back. And so there's this website called Tiny Buddha. I used to love reading the write-ups from that website. So I would read articles from that website, and then I would just read it through the microphone. And I would share it with people, and people would find it so encouraging. So all I needed was to start. I just started with an idea of, can I just take this book? First thing, I actually wanted to read the whole book on the podcast because I was like, I'm not going to change the information. I'll just read chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, which is almost illegal to do so because of copyright issues. So I decided that I was going to merge. So if you go to the podcast and see what it's about merging information in psychology, neuroscience. So as I was expanding my studies, is where most content came in. So most episodes came in from me learning and learning and learning and learning and learning. About necessarily putting together the podcast, I had I had like the equipment. So working in communications and media made me, and this is also very interesting as trial and error. I had tried to do different things before the podcast. So I had a microphone, had a sound card, I had everything I needed, and I had every sort of equipment, basic equipment that I needed to start the podcast, but I did not know what to actually do with it. So when I started is when I was like, wait, I can actually do a podcast. Like I would want to share this information with people, but the trick was I'm actually very camera shy. I could not do a YouTube channel or stuff like that. So my hate of being in the media, despite working in the media, made me choose a podcast because I could be more comfortable on a podcast. I could say whatever I wanted. I could do anything. I could record it in any sort of way I wanted. So podcast was more comfortable. I would say it's more comfortable for me than being on camera. Same information, but just not no camera, just behind the scenes. That's how I started actually. Yeah.
Oh, that's quite interesting because I know many people are also afraid of starting things on the internet because of the fear of being in front of the camera. And I was listening to somebody say that you really do not have. I know everybody's listening to Gary Vee saying record content, hold a camera, and shoot a video every single day. But I promise you, if a video is not something that you're comfortable with, it's okay for you to do other things. It's okay for you to write. It's okay for you to record audio. It's okay for you to do TikToks if they're easier than sitting in front of a camera and shooting a YouTube video, you know. So I like that you started with what you had, and also you started where you are with what you knew was most comfortable for you, which was audio. Did this ever cross your mind at any point to consider doing video? Considering video is also very popular right now. There's always somebody starting a YouTube channel. Is that something that ever crossed your mind?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
You can.
Yes.
I think there's
Oh, okay.
You can hear me.
Yes.
A bit of a glitch.
How about now? Can you hear me?
All right. Is it back well?
Yes, your video has been okay the entire time. I think
It's yours actually that
okay. So maybe it's an internet issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So
you can repeat the
Did
question.
you catch my question? Should I repeat myself?
You can just repeat it.
Yeah. So my question was about whether you ever considered doing video, considering there's a lot of everybody's starting a YouTube channel left, right, and center. Is that something that you ever considered, or because of you being camera shy, did you always think it's gonna be audio? And is that also the same direction you headed with your content in general?
One of my biggest inspirations for podcasting and staying on audio has always been Adele Onyango. I remember when Adele Onyango did her first episode of the podcast to what she's been able to do has always stayed on audio. There's a lot of, no, I don't want to say complications. There's a lot of effort and a lot that's needed to put something on audio and sustaining it, video actually, to sustain it on video. There's quality issues, and it's not that I may not be able to afford it. I can because I have the equipment, but when you do so much, like you keep your content or what you do on so many media forms or platforms, you actually are always under pressure to keep up with them. You know, like video is keep up with a YouTube channel. Audio is keep up with an audio channel. And for me, I can only say it's pretty easy for me to maintain the podcast within the line that it is right now. I would want the podcast to go on video. That's part of my plan for this year. But I want it to go on video when it's the right time, the right place, and the right thing. You know, I want the moment I start putting it on video, I don't stop. And I actually have enough content to sustain it. I've been able to sustain it on audio for such a long time, for almost two and a half years now. And I would not want to put it out on video and then confuse my audience. I think the guys are already used to it being on audio, on audio, on audio, as I'm used to listening to so many podcasts on audio. So I always say, people ask me that question, and I say, if I'm okay listening to podcasts without ever seeing the faces of the people behind the podcast, there's millions of people who are okay just like me, and those are the people I want to reach to. So I don't know. This year, yes, I'm going video a little bit, but would I want to stick with audio? Of course, I would want to stick with audio.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Trust me, I get it because I am somebody who has made videos for a while, and I know how much effort it takes to sustain a YouTube channel,
Yeah.
to be on Instagram doing the lives, or any other type of content on the internet that requires video. Video is just a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It's basically like cooking chapatis. A lot of effort, but the reward is like very low, very low, unless you're really like up there and you have studio quality, unless it's really top notch. The struggle is quite real. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody's listening and wondering, what is this book that you were reading that had led you to start the podcast? So please tell us what book this was, so that even us we can go read.
Yeah. The book is by Dr. Annie Lembke. She's a doctor of neuroscience.
Yeah.
She's a professor actually in neuroscience at in the Stanford University.
Mm-hmm.
The book is called Dopamine. Just
Dopamine
the name
Nation,
it's
yeah.
yes. So Dopamine is a book about finding balance in an age of indulgence. So she explains how the world today is pretty overstimulated by literally everything. And she goes, since she studied neuroscience, she goes deep into the science of how people get addicted. She also psychiatry means she gets to deal with a lot of people with addictions. And it's not necessarily drug addictions. Funny enough, she deals with people, social media addictions, a lot of addictions that we don't think are actually addictions. Like social media addiction is not conventionally diagnosable, but it's actually an addiction, but we are yet to accept that it is. So it explains all those things that will leave you like, the world has changed so fast and it's going to keep changing. So I've read it like 3, 4 times, and I still keep assessing. And funny enough, I actually reached out to her, and she's coming to the podcast, so that's incredible for me. So I really, yeah, it's a New York Times best-selling thing 2021 over there 2020. So, a book that has been read by millions of people, I think, over the West, or yeah, over the West. It's always nice to talk about it because it's helped me see the world, or this new world that we live in. I would say a new world of social media, pretty much advertising indulgence, addictions, and so many in a new way. So it inspired me to actually understand myself and the world, as I was always studying psychology. And that's why I actually wanted to like understand the human brain and signed up for neuroscience classes without necessarily knowing how complex they were, but it was fun anyway. So I got what I wanted. I wasn't looking for certificates. I was actually just looking for information. I got what I wanted. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh wow. Wow, that's amazing. I love that book. I've also read it like several times, so
Oh.
it's one of my favorites. Yeah. I am a big reader, so there's that as well. So yeah, I'm really glad that's the book, because it's a brilliant book, very well written, very well researched. Yeah, brilliant stuff. um, tell me a bit more about your organization and the therapists that you work with. How did you end up forming the organization? What kind of services does your organization offer? How many therapists do you work with? Yeah, what demographics do you work with? Things along those lines. If anybody was looking to find a therapist and they stumbled upon your organization, what would they find there?
Okay. So it's such a big thing that created also in partnership with other organizations, like VNM Safe Zone, Good News Mental Space, which are really big organizations, I'd say, in the country, doing mental health. So as Unstimulate Your Mind, as I've said, I, along the way of doing content, realized that it's okay to share information. I think what you're doing actually right now is sharing information on stuff, and even as you do this lives. But at most, people actually need to listen talk to a therapist. Information is cool, but talking to a therapist is more important. It helps them and to make informed decisions. So out of that, I was able to come up with a way of partnering with so many therapists. So at least I have like 6, 7. The organization around 6, 7 therapists, male, female. What do we major in? We major in individual therapy. Which is people just sitting with a therapist like you, doing individual therapy, whatever you've gone through, whatever you're going through. There's group therapy, which we do. There's kids therapy, which along the way I've realized how important it is for children. You'd rather do kids therapy now than individual therapy 20 years later. I think it's pretty important to do such things for kids. So there are 3 major forms of services that we do, broken down into both virtual and physical. Have the office, not just one office, have like 3, 4 offices which are around the city and the country, which helps people if you need to make it. One of my major goals and a major goal even with the partners is to make therapy not just convenient but also affordable. So make sure the rates are really affordable, and the convenience part is where an office can be near you. You don't have to go to the main office. You could do it virtually. One of the things that has really boomed is virtual therapy. Kitambo, it was so hard. Like you needed to cross rivers and mountains to see a therapist, but now they can see you anywhere, anytime. So we've tried so much to make sure that that's working perfectly, and it actually is. So those are the 3 major things we deal with, and with the forms that we deal in: virtual and physical therapy. So it's just like a choice you make, which one is okay with you. You want to sit with a therapist, that's fine. You want to do it virtually because of convenience, time, people are working up and down, that's fine. You can just do whatever you want. Yeah, so long as you get the help that you need. I think I think even for you as a therapist, the most important thing is somebody to get the help that they need.
Yeah, that's true. And I like that you also have the virtual sessions, as you said. With COVID, virtual became the way, and it became more accepted. So that's a good thing. That's a good thing, because now people are able to get access to therapy even when they are not physically able to go. So a number of reasons that could contribute to you not being able to go see a therapist. But I promise, if you have your phone and you have the internet, you can access a therapist. So yeah, I think that's really cool. That's really cool. I just want to give a quick shout out to the people who have already joined the live. Thank you for coming through. Tell your friends to join the live. And as we continue this conversation, we'll see where it goes. So just to bring us closer to to bring us closer to the main theme of this podcast, which is mental health. I don't know if this is something that you've done before, but I think this is a good time for you to walk us through your mental health journey, your personal mental health journey. When did you first become familiar with mental health as a concept? What have you struggled with? What do you struggle with? How do you deal with it? What have you used in the past? Who have you leaned on in the past to help you? Yeah, so basically your mental health journey. When did you become aware that mental health was a thing? There's usually that time you're like, oh wait, what's mental health? And you become aware of it. So maybe walk us down that journey around how you started your awareness on mental health, other than the book, of course, and what you've struggled with, what you struggled with, and how you take care of yourself.
Okay. That's a really interesting question, because it's like we get aware of mental health when things happen to us. Like all the wrong things things start going wrong is when you become so aware. That's very interesting, because it makes me want to push people to kids therapy. Let them start understanding these things when they're young. They're like 5 years old, 10 years old, so that they don't get to their 20s and they start struggling, and they it's okay to do therapy in your 20s. There's nothing wrong with that. But the question you've asked just made me think of why it's so important for kids to understand these things, so that you grow up and become healthier. So for me, I don't know when I actually became aware of mental health. I think it's through the struggles I've mentioned. I struggled a lot when I was young. For my entire childhood until adulthood, I had no idea that I was suffering from ADHD until Well, it's like been maybe a year or two now since I was diagnosed, same with anxiety, which, well, thankfully I've been able to, I'm able to manage well. But before that, it was always, I'd say chaos. It was always chaos. My life was pretty chaotic, but not in a conventional way. It was in a way that how chaos can be without you understanding that there's chaos. When you're so used to like being anxious or ADHD. ADHD is one of like the things that you could be so used to until it becomes part of you that you barely want it to be diagnosed, and then you barely understand what it is. So for me, I would barely concentrate in class. I would barely hold a thought because my mind was always, drifting and drifting and drifting to so many things. It's like I would have a million thoughts in a millisecond, and I would barely like see the teacher in class when they were teaching because either I wasn't there in my head or I had like a million thoughts. So that affected my schooling, my education, how good I was doing. Somebody always tell I was a genius. I've always been a genius in my head, but on paper I wasn't because as like everything was in my head, it would never translate to paper. Um, but I've always remained like a genius in my head. So that was because I had ADHD and it was never diagnosed. And ADHD sometimes comes with anxiety because if you can't concentrate well, if you can't read well, if you can't hold your thoughts, if your brain is always foggy, you become anxious because now you're worried like, why can't I do this? Why am I not concentrating? So anxiety comes out of that. So I struggled a lot for many years, but at some point is when I went to therapy. I one day just decided, you know what, to hell, I'm going to go to therapy. And first day I got diagnosed with like extreme anxiety. I don't know how my therapist put it, but it was like extreme. You know the diagnosis you guys do. For me, it's like red hot, red hot levels. So from then is when I didn't go into. I was supposed to go into meds, funny enough, but I didn't take the meds. I was like, you know what? I think I could be able to manage without meds, and I did. I have never been on meds, thankfully. Meds are sometimes good for some people, not good for some people. Yeah, and then along the way is when out of therapy again is when I discovered that I had ADHD. So it's like, alright, so anxiety was a thing, but ADHD was actually the main thing that was causing the anxiety. Barely think anxiety causes ADHD, but ADHD causes anxiety. So when I was broken down and seeing that I had the attention deficit side more than the hypersensitive side, because ADHD is attention deficit and hypersensitive disorder. So it's like there's ADD, attention deficit, and then there's people who have hypersensitive. So I was more attention deficit. So it's chemical and stuff like that. But I am been able to, by the grace of God, I always say that I'm able to manage, I'm able to live day to day. There's challenges. There's challenges when there's like a chemical imbalance in your brain or whatever. But I'm here, and I feel like it's something that without me necessarily having to put my thought into it every day, I've been able to manage slowly by slowly. It's a step at a time. It's been, I think, a year and a half now. But again, here I am. I feel like I'm doing okay. Still, making steps and steps and steps. So I think that's been my journey so far. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that personal experience, because I think when people hear these things, they're so abstract. When you hear about ADHD, you hear about anxiety, they're so abstract. And then when they hear a personal story, they're like, oh, wait, okay. So they actually do happen to human beings like us. They're not abstract things, they're not concepts, they're not things in a textbook. They're actual things that happen to real life human beings. So thank you for sharing your experience. How did you find the process of looking for a therapist and eventually finding a therapist? How was that? And when you go to therapy, how easy or difficult was it to be in therapy? What was the experience of therapy like? Are you still in therapy? Yeah, things like that. What was that like?
Funniest story. Listen, I was like at my worst mentally when I decided to go to therapy. So what I did is I just went online and searched for whatever counseling and stuff. Then I think the first two, the one that popped up is one that I chose. And it ended up being like the best thing for me. It's like God was just taking care of me. So I didn't end up in the wrong place. I ended up in the right place. I found a really wonderful therapist. So I was consistent with therapy at the first, like at first, which is very important for somebody when you're at your worst and you go to therapy. It's okay to go once. It's okay to, based on finances, because there's financial implications. But I stayed consistent for a few months. Then I started getting better, and so the consistency started dying off. But I still do go regularly to therapy. But at the beginning, it was very consistent, like every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, until it went to 2 months, and then it went to 3 months, then it went to a month, and then 4 months. It's based on how you feel. But for me, at the beginning, and I always advise anybody who either shows up at an organization or wherever you go to therapy, it's take the first few sessions very seriously, very consistently. You'll start feeling better, and you and your therapist will go and separate ways along the way. So, but at the beginning, keep your relationship as close as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Because I think in the beginning, it's when you're building the rapport with your therapist. It's when you're getting to know who your therapist is as a person. You're getting to know what therapy is. You're getting to understand what your symptoms imply. You're getting to understand what you might need in the coming days and weeks and months. So yeah, I agree with you. The first few sessions are very important. If possible, do them weekly, at least for the first 6 sessions. Have weekly sessions. Speak to your therapist. Be honest. Be open. Find somebody that you gel with. Um, I remember when I went to therapy, my first experience was not the best. I broke up with my therapist after the first session. So I know the challenges that come with looking for a therapist and finding one. And I'm glad that you found one that was actually good for you from the very beginning. That's very rare. Okay, not very rare. Maybe that's an exaggeration. That's rare, and it's a privilege to get a therapist that you actually gel with in the beginning. So yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool, and I'm glad you still go to therapy when you feel that you need it. Who has been your biggest support system through this journey, in your mental health journey? Who has been the biggest support system that, looking back, you're like, if it was not for them, I don't want to think where I would be or what I would be doing.
Um, there's a lot of I'd say just family giving you the space that you need to be you. Some the beginning it was so hard to like get them to understand, but eventually support system isn't necessarily somebody who holds your hand, but it's somebody who gives you the space to actually be you. I think they've done that very well along the way. My partner also has been really incredible. I'd say the people who are like closest to me, not the meaning of like the closest, like pretty close, this next close. That's the people who've been, and there's it's not like 15 people, it's just like two or one or three people who've been very important because I barely disclose like these struggles, or they barely show like in public, but behind the scenes there's somebody who knows this is what could be going on. And I also even say my therapist because that's the person who's like with you through the sessions and you show up again and again and again, and I have no idea how you're just able to listen to somebody's like you know like bad week, and you're also having your bad week and still holding on to their stuff. So you could say family, you could say all those things, but your therapist, I'd say, man, that's been a big pillar, that's been a big pillar. Just listening to me, it's something, and also like helping me get like proper diagnosis, like without misdiagnosis. By the grace of God, that's been pretty great for me. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool, and I'm glad you have people around you, and also people who give you the space. Yeah, that's very, very important. What do you think is something you can confidently say you've learned in therapy that you would not have stumbled upon? Why were you doing this for yourself? Something that therapy has helped you realize, especially about your diagnosis, as well as just life in general and mental health in general. something that has really stood out for you in therapy? Aha moments, insights, things of the sort.
Um, the first thing is just acknowledging that, like, let's say, for example, anxiety is real, to acknowledge that life is a pretty mountain and a pretty valley sometimes. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's where you should be, you know. It's quite unfortunate that we have ADHD, well, it's found somebody like me, could find somebody like you, could be born with it, genetics and stuff like that. Um, it's okay if you get through the struggles, like you have a challenge and you have your ups and downs. Um, Grief is something that a lot of people face here and there. At one point, you could face it. It's like something's almost obvious in life, but it does not necessarily mean that that's your identity. Like that means you're always a depressed person, or I'm always an anxious person. Anxiety is something that unfortunately can get to you, but it does not necessarily mean that that's where you're going to be for the rest of your life. Um, a bad day does not mean a bad life. You could have a bad experience, but it doesn't mean you have a bad life. I think the biggest thing I remember when I got my diagnosis for ADHD, my therapist was always like, "Listen, it's okay. It's okay that this is what we have to deal with." But one of the important things she taught me was it's okay to also live day to day trying to manage it, even though it's not your identity. It's like somebody who has cancer, for example. When you have cancer, you've got to acknowledge that I have cancer, like I'm stage 3. It doesn't mean that you're not praying. You pray that that thing gets healed, you pray that you never go through that kind of pain if it's a physical pain. But it's okay to create boundaries. It's okay to have structures that help you walk through that kind of pain that you're going through if it's cancer. So my therapist taught me the biggest lesson once I was diagnosed with ADHD, said, listen, you have ADHD. You weigh, or you'll probably not have a day-to-day life like many other people. But that doesn't mean you're different. That doesn't mean that you're weird. That doesn't mean that you're wrong. That doesn't mean you're different. It just means that you have ADHD and you have to create structures around how you can get through your day with it. It's the same thing with, as I've said, if you have cancer, you might have to acknowledge that you have cancer. It's not your identity, but you can say, listen, I got cancer. I have to structure my days in a way that I don't feel as much pain. If I have to take painkillers, if I have to go to chemo, pray that after some time that will fade out. But once you have it, once you're depressed and your therapist say, listen, you're going through depression, you got to acknowledge it and say, I'm actually depressed and I'm going to work through it day to day to make sure that I'm no longer here. And the biggest lesson, as I've said, out of all this is acknowledging that this is actually here. It's not going to stay for long, hopefully. It won't be identity, but it's okay to acknowledge what you're going through and say, this is how I feel, but I'm going to walk through it. Create structures, boundaries. If you've gone through like depression, kabisa, it's okay to create boundaries. It's okay to have all these things to protect yourself from triggers again. But only things can happen if you acknowledge. It's not like accept. There's a difference between accepting and acknowledging. Acknowledging is saying, okay, I see you over there. Accepting is like allowing it into the system, but you could acknowledge and say, I see you there, I just don't want you to stay there. I'll make sure you don't stay there. But once you acknowledge something, it's easier for you to accept and it's easier for you to deal with it. So I think that's the biggest lesson I've learned in therapy, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially the part you speak about identity, because I feel like most of us have the tendency to take on things as identities just because they have happened in our lives. So you struggle with anxiety, you say, I'm an anxious person. I am an anxious person. or I live with anxiety. But some of these things are not really identities; they are just situations, and it's okay for you to be like, yes, I do struggle with anxiety sometimes when X, Y, and Z happens. It's not I am anxious. I am an anxious person. You don't need to personalize it. You can distance yourself from it, and when you distance yourself from it, it's easier for you to see it for what it is. That it's just a situation. It's an illness that can be dealt with, and you have more power to deal with it when it's not part of your identity. Because I think also something people forget is that identities really do not liberate you. Identities just put you in a box. And yes, having the tagline, having the name for it, makes it easier for you to understand what it is. Because you've named it, then it becomes a little bit more tangible.
Yeah.
But it becoming tangible does not need to become like a personality trait. It does not become an identity. It can be tangible and labeled, but also outside of you as a thing that exists that you can handle. And also being aware of the times that it shows up. When you feel anxious at a particular time. It's not anxiety 24/7. So I'm realizing that there are times that I don't feel anxious, or being aware that I feel anxious when X, Y, and Z happens gives you more power, because then you know that you can try to deal with X, Y, and Z so that you do not feel anxious. So I think that's part of realizing that it's not an identity, it's not a personality trait, is very important, so that you can deal with things more powerfully, that you can put yourself in situations where you know, I have the power in me to take care of myself.
Yeah.
That's quite important.
Yeah.
Thank you for all those nuggets of wisdom that you have shared. I am sure somebody who is listening and maybe they struggle with ADHD, they find themselves in situations where anxiety takes over. I'm sure they have listened to that and they can get some wisdom out of it. They can get some confidence in knowing that if somebody else has dealt with it, they can deal with it. If somebody else has been able to build a system where they exist alongside the anxiety and life still moves on and they still get to achieve their goals, even they can achieve their goals. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for being open. I keep telling people that every time we share our stories, it's not because we want to just, you know, go out there and tell everybody everything. It's about helping people realize that they are not alone. So reducing that aloneness. That's why we need to tell our stories. Never shy away from telling your story. Anytime you get a chance, please do so. It makes somebody else realize that they are not alone. So yes, thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. As we come to the end of this live, maybe you can tell us a little bit about where people can find you if they are looking for therapists. As you said, you're working with a bunch of organizations.
I think I lost you.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me now, yeah? Awesome. Okay. So, as we come to the end of this live,
yeah, I can see you.
Okay. Awesome. So, as we come to the end of this live, please share with us some resources that you can check out. You've mentioned the book Dopamine, which we are going to link in the description of this video. What other resources, mental health resources, life resources, would you like to share with us that we can take away and go and explore if we do not have access to a therapist at this time?
All right. That book is one that I absolutely recommend. My podcast is another one I always recommend as a wonderful resource for information. What I do is mix information to help you make informed decisions. And I'm very, very specific that I give you information, you make the decisions. You know? So when it comes to your mental health, I help you with information, you make informed decisions. Whenever you feel a little bit discouraged, man, there's a lot of not just information, but I've always mentioned that website called the Tiny Buddha. It's not a religious website. It has never been a religious website, but the articles that are there They just give you loads of hope and encouragement if you're going through depression, anxiety. So you can just read like a 3 minute like article. And sometimes information is cool, like the way I share information, the way I put neuroscience out there and break it down. Sometimes that 1 minute read that you could go through in that website could be so important to just get you through the next day, the next day, and the next day. So that's a big resource that I absolutely love for mental health. Even though they haven't tagged it exactly as a mental health resource, I absolutely couldn't really encourage anybody to do it. But I think the biggest resource for me is just finding strength in faith. A lot of people dismiss faith as not or can't work with mental health part. I've really found so much strength in my faith as a Christian. So I kind of also say the Bible is also a resource for anyone, or faith in general, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, Indian. Finding like strength beyond the natural is important. Like looking to something that is beyond, like the natural supernatural power is also very important. So whatever that could be. But in terms of like real resources, that book is very important. Dopamine, tinybooster.com is a good resource. There's also another book. No, it's a website. No, a podcast. That's for nerds, or if you're really nerdy, there's a podcast called Huberman's Lab. He really shares a lot of information on. He's also, I think, a neuroscientist. So it's usually like 2 hour long episodes on loads of things, even ADHD. But it's a really important resource for me because I get a lot of information from that. And there's also like nice, well put together podcasts for like and can encourage you. There's one channel that I love is called Psych to Go. It's on YouTube. Psych to Go is a really great resource. They share like 3 videos a day. And they break down information so well, like the voiceovers are so nice. So Psych to Go is another one. Dr. Huberman Lab is another one. There's this lady who used to act on Big Bang Theory, who's a neuroscientist. I think her name is Mayim Bialik or something. So she has a wonderful podcast also. Check it out on YouTube. I think it's called Conversations with Bialik or something. I think I'll get the link and then post it on my stories also. So it's a wonderful resource. There's another book that I have used on the podcast lots of times. It's written by a therapist. It's called, her name is Dr. Julie Smith. The book is called Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? So Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before is a great book. So simple to read, wonderful. It's not scientific. I think she says she wrote the book out of people who came to therapy always telling us, why has nobody told me this before? Like, it's so nice to hear this, and it's so simple. So she put it into a book. So that's another book. Actually, I could recommend it more than Dopamine because it's simpler. It's simpler. Dopamine is literally for like nerds or people who like science. But this other book for Jolie Smith, it's more simple. It's really graceful to read. It can encourage you. Zero science, just wonderful things that you can do day to day. So great resources, I'd say. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those resources. I'm sure everybody will find something here that they can really use. And just to mention, just to add on the resources, I highly encourage that you check the link that I'm going to add to the description box that has free mental health services for if you're in Kenya, if you're in Nairobi, and you're looking for free mental health services because for one reason or another you can't afford therapy. Do not travel in silence. I'm going to link free resources in the description box. Please check them out and realize that there's help. You just need to go ahead and seek it. So if you're looking for therapy services, if you're looking for any support when it comes to mental health, please check out that link. It's called Free Therapy Services in Kenya. It's literally in the name. So please check it out. Thank you so much for those resources. Again, highly appreciate them. I like that you mentioned things that are very accessible to most people. I'm sure everybody's going to find something that they can actually use for their mental health. So with that said, thank you so much for coming to the podcast. I really appreciate you. I am hoping that you can tell us where people can find you and if they're looking for a therapist, how they can connect with you so that they can get connected to a therapist. Things are long, where to find you, plug yourself, go out, tell us everything about yourself. This is your time to brag. Please do so.
Well, if there's anyone who is zero social media, zero anything, actually me. So as you can see, I'm using the organization social media. So I don't necessarily advertise anything about me because I prefer the podcast and stuff like that. But through the same account that I'm using, that's the organization page. So if you need any sort of information like this, I think along the feed or even the stories, there's links that can get into our official call line, helpline, that can get you to our mail. Everything is so well put on this page. The mail that you can use, the number that you can call, there's a helpline, somebody can, call in, get to a therapist. Like everything else is just literally painted on this page. The podcast, however, is available on Spotify for free. It's available on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast. I think we are on almost 25 platforms, which is incredible to just be on. If you just go on the internet and search and stimulate your mind, it will show up on any platform, depending on the device that you're using. There's new episodes every single week, and the episodes are put together as a merge of information in psychology, in neuroscience, in research facts. Sometimes you use personal experiences. We merge them, create an episode, and then we just share it out. Along the way, felt like that information is good, very good, but that is important also. So it could be a really beautiful match. Much information you're getting on the podcast, go to therapy, get the help that you need. So that also came along, and we put together the organization, and now somebody can get the therapy that they need through the links that are almost everywhere on this page. So the number is there, the mails are there, the therapists are certified, like going to school, no one is a quack therapist. With accredited, certified, professional, licensed, just like make sure that you've gone to school to do things and experience 10 plus years of experience, which is really huge for counselors and therapists. Yeah, so I barely advertise myself. I prefer to just put out what we do more than what I do, because what I do is literally this. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for that. I hope everybody gets to check that out. If you're looking for a therapist, if you're looking for mental health support, as we mentioned, there's the free resources and the resources you can get from Unstimulate Your Mind, the organization. So go to their page, check them out, connect with the therapist, talk to someone, get the support that you need. So thank you so much, Moses, for coming to the podcast today. Thank you for everything that you've shared. Thank you for letting us into your personal world by telling us your personal story and your personal journey with mental health. And thank you for putting out the information that you do. I think it's very important that this information gets to the people that need it. So thank you for being part of the solution by creating mental health related content and making sure that this content gets to as many people as possible. With that said, I don't know if you have a parting shot as we come to the end of the podcast. I don't know if you have a parting shot you want to leave with the audience, something you want people to take away to end this live.
There's something that I've just been like trying to figure out. I think it's okay if you don't have a New Year, I don't know, plan, or you don't have the goals yet and everything you want to achieve. There's a quote that I listened to in a sermon. The guy was saying, we actually dwell so much on planning, and we get so worried about the plan that we end up not planning after all. So you get really worried about making a plan that you actually don't plan anyway. So I think one of the episodes I actually did last year was why it's okay if you haven't had your New Year resolution. So if there's anyone who hasn't had it yet, it's 8 days into the year. It's okay if you haven't. If you don't want to start worrying about it so much that it gets too much and you haven't even lived, you haven't experienced 3 months of the year because you are worried of a New Year's plan, and then unfortunately you actually end up not making any. Then you'll end up condemning yourself for not doing it, and it's just a really hard cycle to be in. So since I've been there, I would say it's okay to just flow with life, just go with the wind, and whatever it takes you, you'll 9 out of 10 be fine, even without struggling for a New Year's plan. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing that. If you're listening and you do not have a plan yet, it's okay for you to not freak out yet. It's okay to chill.
Yeah.
You're only 8 days into the year, so it's okay for you to chill.
Yeah.
Thank you for that parting shot. Thank you to everybody who has been able to join, and thank you to everybody who's going to listen to this in the future. Share this with somebody who's listening, because you don't know how you could change their life. There's somebody who's listening to this who needs it 100%. There's somebody who has not yet listened to this, but they need you to send it to them so that they can hear it. So share mental health content. I keep saying, be the first person to share mental health content in the circles that you're in, because you never know. Many people do not have access to this knowledge. So if you come across it, please share it with a friend. Thank you, Moses, for your time. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for coming to the podcast. All the best in the new year. All the best with going into the video world. All the best with all the episodes that you are planning ahead. And let us know if there's any way we can support you as Safe Space Arena. Please tell us, and we are willing to recommend you everywhere we go. So thank you so much, and I wish everybody a wonderful evening. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye.
All right. Bye. Thank you.